The night was cold and silent. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper. Inside a small wooden house, a man sat alone, staring at the dim light of a lamp. His name was Daniel. He lived far from the city, far from people and far from noise. His days were quiet, his nights even quieter. That was how he liked it, or at least that was what he told himself. But on this night, something disturbed the silence. A sound, soft, weak, almost too small to notice. A knock. Daniel's head lifted. He frowned. Nobody came to his house. Nobody even knew the path through the woods. At first he thought he was imagining it. But then, another knock. Louder this time, but shaky, as if the one knocking had no strength left. Daniel stood up slowly, his boots pressed against the wooden floor. His heart began to beat faster. His hand reached for the old iron pipe he kept by the door. He was no fool. Out here strangers could be thieves, or worse. He pulled open the door and froze. There, in the pale moonlight, stood a figure, small, thin, wrapped in torn cloth that was more shadow than clothing. Her skin was pale blue, glowing faintly in the darkness. Her eyes, large, frightened, and shining with hunger, looked up at him. She was not human. Daniel tightened his grip on the pipe. His voice was rough when he spoke. "What do you want?" The girl trembled. Her lips parted and her voice came out like a broken whisper. I can cook. I can clean. I can be quiet. Please just let me in." Her words hit him harder than any weapon. She was not demanding. She was not threatening. She was begging. Daniel's eyes scanned her. She had no shoes. Her feet were cut and bleeding. Her hands clutched the torn cloth around her body. He could see scars, old scars, that told of chains, beatings, and suffering. Her shoulders shook as if she expected him to strike her down. "Why here?" Daniel asked Shaw. Reply, "Why my door?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she kept her head low. No one else, everyone else, closes their door. Daniel's breath caught. He should shut the door. That was the safe choice. She was trouble. He could feel it. Someone like her, an alien, weak and desperate, was always running from something, and whatever she was running from could follow. But then another sound reached him, her stomach. It growled so loudly in the silent night that Daniel's chest tightened. She had not eaten, probably in days. Still, his mind screamed at him, "Don't do it. Don't let her in. Don't risk your life." But his hand moved on its own. He lowered the iron pipe. He opened the door wider. "Come inside." The girl's eyes widened as if she could not believe it. For a moment she stood frozen. Then with trembling steps, she crossed the threshold. The warmth of the room touched her skin. She flinched at first, as if even kindness might burn her. Daniel shut the door, his face still hard, but his heart already questioning his choice. She stood in the middle of the room, silent and still, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't dare sit. She didn't dare move. She just whispered again, "I can cook. I can clean. I can be quiet." Daniel sighed. "Sit down." She obeyed quickly, as though afraid he might change his mind. He placed a bowl of bread and stew in front of her. She stared at it as if it was a dream. Then, slowly, she began to eat. Not greedily, not wildly, but carefully, like someone who knew food could be taken away at any moment. Daniel watched. The way her hands shook, the way her eyes closed for a second at the taste. She was starving, yet she still ate with manners. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Who are you?" She looked up, her lips parting, but no words came. Instead, her eyes filled with fear. She looked down again, shaking her head. "Yet," she whispered. "Talking is dangerous." Daniel felt the weight of her words. He realized she carried secrets that could bring danger to his quiet life. But as he looked at her thin frame, her scarred hands, her desperate eyes, he knew one thing. He had already made his choice. For the first time in years, Daniel's silent home was no longer empty. And outside, in the cold darkness, unseen shadows moved through the woods, searching. The house was quiet again, but it was not the same kind of quiet as before. Daniel sat at the edge of the table, his eyes watching the girl who now sat across from him. She ate slowly, like someone who feared every bite might be her last. She held the spoon with shaking hands, and sometimes her eyes darted toward the door, as if she expected someone to break it down any moment. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He was a man used to silence, used to living alone. But now there was this strange presence in his house, this girl who had whispered her way into his life. He was not sure what to make of it. When she finished the small bowl of stew, she lowered her spoon carefully. Then she whispered again, almost as if she had practiced the words for years. "I can cook. I can clean. I can be quiet." Daniel frowned. "You already said that." Her big eyes lifted toward him, filled with fear, and then dropped again. She sat very still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He realized something in that moment. This was not only a habit, it was survival. Someone had trained her to repeat these words. Someone had made her believe that these were the only things that gave her value. He stood up and carried her empty bowl to the sink. "What's your name?" Her lips trembled. She looked at him, but no sound came. Then she whispered the same word again. "Quiet." Daniel sighed and shook his head. "I didn't ask you to be quiet, I asked your name." But she only lowered her head, her shoulders tightening, as though she expected to be punished for even that. The man rubbed his face with one hand. He was tired. He was frustrated. Yet something inside him kept him from pushing further. He had seen men before. Broken men. Soldiers who came back from wars. Slaves freed but never whole again. He knew that look. It was the look of someone who had been forced into silence for too long. "Fine," he muttered. "No name tonight." He walked toward the small fireplace. The flames burned low, but enough warmth filled the room. He tossed in another log, and the crackle of fire echoed softly. When he turned back, he found her watching the flames with wide eyes, as if she had never seen fire before. Daniel noticed her clothes again, thin, torn, barely covering her. The cold outside would have killed her if she had not found his door. He pulled out an old blanket from the shelf and placed it on the table in front of her. "Here," he said. She stared at the blanket as if it were some kind of treasure. Then slowly, carefully, she wrapped it around herself. The moment it touched her skin, she shivered, but this time not from cold. Her lips parted slightly, and Daniel could swear he saw the ghost of a smile. It was the first sign of life he had seen on her face. Still, he did not let his guard down. He crossed his arms and asked, "Why were you at my door? Who are you running from?" The blanket shifted as she pulled it tighter around her shoulders. Her eyes filled with shadows again, and she whispered one word, "Hunters." Daniel froze. That word carried weight. He knew of traders and slavers who moved through the outer settlements. Some called them hunters. They captured anyone weak, anyone different, and sold them like goods in a market. If she had escaped from them, then danger was close. He moved to the window and pushed the curtain aside just enough to look out. The night was calm, but the forest outside hid many things. He could almost feel eyes watching, even if he saw nothing. He turned back to the girl. She sat small and silent, her face half hidden by the blanket. She looked like she wanted to disappear into it, to vanish from the world. Daniel walked closer, leaning down slightly. "If hunters are after you, then this place isn't safe. Not for you, not for me." Her eyes shot up at him, wide and desperate. "Please," she whispered. "I will work. I will stay quiet. Just don't send me out." The way she said it made his chest tighten. She wasn't just asking, she was begging for her life. Daniel straightened up, rubbing the back of his neck. His instincts told him to send her away, to protect himself, to keep his quiet life untouched. But another voice inside him whispered something else. It told him he had already crossed that line when he opened the door. He sighed. "You can stay. For now." Her body sagged with relief. She lowered her head, whispering again, "I can cook. I can clean. I can be quiet." Daniel almost told her to stop saying that, but he didn't. Instead, he said, "Tomorrow, you'll tell me more." The girl nodded quickly, though it was clear she had no intention of speaking tomorrow either. That night, Daniel lay awake in his bed, listening to the soft sound of her breathing from the other room. For years, he had been alone in his silence. Now, there was another silence in his house, but it was a silence filled with fear, with mystery, with danger. And outside, the woods whispered with movement. Somewhere, not far away, hunters searched for their missing prize. Morning light crept through the cracks of the old shutters. Daniel woke earlier than usual, his ears already aware of a sound that didn't belong. For years, his mornings had always been the same. Silence, the wind outside, the creak of wood. But today, there was movement. He sat up, frowning, and listened. Pots clinking, water being poured, the soft shuffle of feet. He rose and walked into the kitchen. There she was, the strange alien girl he had let in last night. She had tied the blanket around her like clothing, her thin arm, as moving carefully as she handled his old cooking pot. Steam rose from it, filling the air with the smell of herbs and broth. Daniel stood in the doorway watching. His house, always still, now seemed to breathe. When she noticed him, she froze. Her hands tightened on the spoon and her eyes darted toward the door like she was ready to run. Daniel raised a hand slowly. "Relax, I'm not angry." She blinked, uncertain. Then, almost whispering, she said the same words again. "I can cook. I can clean. I can be quiet." Daniel let out a sigh. "Yes, I see that." He sat at the table and rubbed his eyes. For years, he had lived with nothing but dust and silence. Now this girl was already stirring life into the place. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. She finished preparing the pot and brought him a bowl. Her hands trembled as she placed it before him, as though expecting him to strike her if she made a mistake. Daniel took a spoonful. The taste surprised him. Simple, but warm. Better than anything he had made in months. He looked up at her. She stood stiff, waiting for judgment. "It's good," he said. Her lips parted slightly. For the first time, she almost smiled. Almost. After breakfast, she began moving around the house with quiet purpose. She swept the floor, wiped the table, and even went to the shelves to organize the things Daniel had left scattered for years. Dust rose, cobwebs vanished. Daniel watched, shaking his head. "You don't have to do all that." But she whispered back, "I must. It is how I stay." The words cut him deeper than he expected. How I stay. He realized this was her way of surviving, by proving her worth, by showing she was not a burden. It made his stomach knot with anger, not at her, but at the world that had forced her to think this way. By midday, the house felt different. The air was lighter, warmer, the smell of food lingering forward. Even the wooden walls seemed less heavy. Daniel had lived there for years, but now, in one morning, it felt alive. Yet the girl herself remained quiet. She worked like a shadow, always moving, never speaking unless he forced her to. And even then, her answers were whispers. At one point, he found her standing by the window, staring out into the forest with a look of fear. Her hands gripped the blanket tightly. "What is it?" Daniel asked, stepping closer. She shook her head quickly. "Nothing." But he followed her gaze. The trees outside swayed in the wind. The forest looked empty. Still, Daniel felt it too, the sense that something was watching. He closed the curtain. "Eat something. You're still too thin." She obeyed, though she ate carefully, as if every bite might be her last. Later, when Daniel went outside to chop wood, he noticed small tracks near the edge of the forest. Heavy boots. More than one set. His grip on the axe tightened. He didn't like the way the prints lingered, circling closer to his land. When he came back inside, the girl was cleaning the old shelves. She found a cracked picture frame lying there. Inside was a photo of Daniel long ago, standing beside another man in uniform, both of them soldiers. The girl picked it up carefully, almost with reverence. "You fought," she whispered. Daniel froze. It was the first time she had spoken without repeating her practiced line. The sound of her real voice startled him. "Yes," he said quietly. "A long time ago." Her eyes stayed on the photo. "Did you win?" Daniel hesitated, then answered honestly, "No one wins." She lowered her head, as if she understood those words all too well. She set the frame back carefully and whispered again, "I can clean. I can cook. I can be quiet." Daniel clenched his jaw. He wanted to tell her she didn't need to keep saying that, but he realized it was the only shield she had left. That evening, as the sun set, The house looked cleaner than it had in years. Daniel sat at the table, watching the fire burn, while the girl sat silently on the other side of the room. The shadows of the flames flickered on her pale blue skin, making her look fragile, yet strangely unbroken. For the first time in years, Daniel did not feel alone. His house was alive again. But as night fell, and the forest outside grew dark, the unease in his chest returned. He remembered the tracks. He remembered her whispered word, hunters. And he knew this fragile peace could not last. The fire burned low, filling the small wooden house with a soft glow. Daniel sat by the table, sharpening his old hunting knife. The sound of steel against stone echoed in the silence. Across the room, the alien girl sat near the fireplace, curled inside the blanket he had given her. She was still, too still, like a bird that expected to be caught at any moment. Daniel watched her quietly. For days, his house had been filled with her presence. She cooked, she cleaned, she worked without a single complaint. She made his house feel alive again, yet he knew almost nothing about her. No name, no story, only silence. The knife scraped again against the stone. Finally, Daniel spoke. "You said hunters. Who are they? Why are they after you?" The girl's shoulders tensed, her head lowered. She whispered the same line she always did, like a shield. "I can cook. I can clean. I can be quiet." Daniel frowned. "That's not an answer." Her hands clutched the blanket tighter. She didn't look at him, didn't move. She was shutting herself inside her silence again. Daniel leaned back in his chair, frustrated. He wanted to know. He needed to know. Because every day she stayed in his house, danger grew closer. Those boot tracks outside still haunted him. But when he looked at her, thin arms, scarred hands, trembling shoulders, his anger softened. She wasn't hiding the truth to protect herself. She was hiding on it because speaking it might break her. He pushed the knife aside, his voice lowered. "Listen, I'm not your enemy. If someone's after you, I need to know. I can't protect you if I don't understand." Her eyes flicked up at him for a second. Just a second. Enough for him to see the fear swimming inside them. Then her gaze fell again. "Talking is dangerous," she whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to press her. He wanted to shake the answers out of her, but the words caught in his throat. Because deep inside, he understood. Some wounds were too deep to speak of. The fire crackled. The silence stretched. Finally, Daniel stood and walked to the window. He pulled the curtain aside just a little. Outside, the moon hung low over the forest. Shadows moved between the trees. Not the wind, not animals. He could feel it, the presence of men. He let the curtain fall back. His chest felt heavy. If the hunters were near, time was running out. Behind him, the girl whispered again, softer than ever. "They take. They sell. They break." Daniel froze. His head turned slowly. She was still staring at the fire, her lips barely moving, but she had spoken. Not the practiced line, not her shield, a piece of truth. "They take us," she said again, voice trembling. "They sell us. They break us." Daniel stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "You escaped." Her eyes filled with tears. "I ran. They will come." Daniel's hand curled into a fist. He wanted to curse, to throw something, to fight the shadows outside. Instead, he sat down across from her. "Then you're safe here," he said firmly. "They'll have to go through me first." Her eyes widened. She shook her head quickly. "No, dangerous. You will die." Daniel gave a small, humorless laugh. "Maybe, but I've faced worse than men with chains." The girl looked at him as if she didn't believe it, as if no one had ever said those words to her before. For the first in his time since she entered his house, she whispered something different, something fragile. "Why?" Daniel blinked. "Why what?" "Why help me?" Her voice broke. "Others closed their doors." Daniel looked at the fire. The flames reflected in his tired eyes. He thought of his past, his battles, his mistakes, his loneliness, and he thought of the night she had knocked at his door, whispering that she could cook, clean, and be quiet. "Because no one deserves to be left out there," he said simply. "Not even you." For a long time she didn't answer, but her tears glistened in the firelight. She pulled the blanket tighter, hiding her face. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes. He had learned enough for now, not her whole story, not her name, but enough to know he couldn't send her away. The questions still burned inside him. Who exactly were these hunters? What did they want with her? Why was she so valuable to them? He could not ask yet. Not now. Instead, he listened to the forest outside, and somewhere out there, far in the darkness, a voice shouted orders. Men moved, dogs barked. The hunters were closer. The night was heavier than usual. The forest outside seemed alive with whispers, each rustle of leaves sounding like footsteps. Daniel sat by the window, the curtain drawn just a little, his eyes scanning the shadows. He saw nothing, but he felt it. The hunters were near. Behind him, the girl sat curled by the fire, clutching the blanket around her like armor. She hadn't eaten much at dinner. She hadn't spoken at all. Her body trembled as if she could sense the danger in the air. Daniel turned from the window. They're out there, aren't they? Her head lowered, and she whispered without looking at him. Yes. Daniel's jaw tightened. He moved to the shelf and pulled down the old rifle he hadn't touched in years. It was worn, the wood cracked, but it still worked. He checked the chamber, loaded the few bullets he had left, and leaned it against the wall near the door. The girl's eyes widened when she saw it. No, she whispered quickly, shaking her head. If they see you fight, they will kill you. Daniel gave a dry laugh. If they come through that door, I don't plan on greeting them with open arms. Her breathing quickened. She pressed her face into the blanket. Please, don't fight. Please. Daniel crouched beside her. His voice softened, though his eyes were hard. I can't promise that, but I will promise one thing. You're not going back to them. Her eyes filled with tears. She shook her head violently, whispering over and over. They take, they sell, they break. They take, they sell, they break. Daniel gritted his teeth. He wanted to silence her fears, but he knew he couldn't erase years of pain in one night. All he could do was protect her. Then, a sound outside. Not the wind, not an animal. Boots, many boots. Daniel grabbed the rifle and motioned for her to stay low. He moved to the window again, peeking through the curtain. Shapes moved between the trees, dark figures, men with torches. The girl gasped quietly, her hands covering her mouth. Her body shook violently, as if the mere sight of them could shatter her. Daniel whispered sharply, "Stay quiet." He watched as the hunters spread out, scanning the ground, searching. One of them raised a lantern, and the light glinted off something metallic, chains. Daniel's grip on the rifle tightened until his knuckles turned white. The hunters were close, too close. He stepped back from the window. His mind raced. He could not fight them all, not with an old rifle and a few bullets. If they surrounded the house, they would burn it down with him inside. But leaving the girl to them was not an option. He turned to her. She was crouched by the fire, whispering the same broken line. I can cook. I can clean. I can be quiet. I can cook. I can clean. I can be quiet. Dan. Ile knelt in front of her, gripping her shoulders firmly. Listen to me, he said, his voice sharp but steady. You are safe here. Do you hear me? Safe. Her eyes brimmed with tears. She shook her head. No one is safe. Not from them. Daniel held her gaze. Then tonight, they'll learn otherwise. Before she could answer, the sound of footsteps crunched closer outside. A voice called out in the darkness. Check the house. She must have run this way. The girl whimpered and buried her face in her hands. Daniel stood, rifle in hand, and blew out the lamp. Darkness filled the house, broken only by the glow of the fire. He moved to the door, his muscles tense, his ears sharp. The hunter's boots grew louder. He could hear their laughter, their cruel voices. She's weak. She won't last the night out here. Search every cabin. Tear the doors down if you must. She's worth more alive. Don't let her slip again. Daniel's blood boiled. They weren't just looking for her. They were hunting her like an animal. One pair of footsteps stopped right outside his door. The wood creaked under the man's weight. Daniel raised the rifle, his finger steady on the trigger. Silence. Then, bang! A heavy fist slammed against the door. The girl cried out softly. Daniel motioned for her to stay down, his eyes never leaving the door. Another voice called from outside. "Nobody home, let's move on." The man outside hesitated. Then his boots scraped against the dirt as he walked away. Daniel didn't breathe until their voices faded deeper into the forest. But he knew it wasn't over. They would search again. They would return. He lowered the rifle and turned back to the girl. She was trembling so violently that the blanket slipped from her shoulders. Her eyes were wide with terror, shining in the firelight. Daniel placed the rifle back against the wall and knelt beside her once more. They didn't find us. You're safe for now." She shook her head, whispering, "Not safe. Never safe." Daniel pulled the blanket back around her shoulders, his voice firm. "As long as you're in this house, you are safe. I swear it." For a long time, she didn't answer. Then slowly, she leaned against him. Just a little, just enough to show she trusted him, even if fear still ruled her heart. Daniel sat there in the dim light, holding his promise in silence. He knew the hunters weren't gone. He knew this night was only the beginning. But he also knew one thing. He would fight. For her. The night stretched long after the hunters left. Daniel sat awake by the fire, the rifle leaning against the wall within arm's reach. Every sound outside made him tense, the crack of a branch, the distant howl of wolves, even the whisper of wind. His eyes stayed sharp, but his mind was heavy. Across from him, the girl had fallen into a restless sleep, curled tightly under the blanket like a child trying to disappear. Her breathing was uneven, broken by whimpers that escaped her lips. It wasn't sleep. It was survival. Daniel watched her quietly. She was fragile, but not weak. He could see it in the way she had endured hunger, cold, and fear. She carried scars, but she was still alive. And that meant there was strength inside her, more strength than she realized. When dawn came, Daniel finally let out a long breath. The hunters hadn't returned in the night, but he knew they weren't gone. They would keep searching. The girl stirred, blinking awake. Her eyes darted around the room until they found him. She froze, then relaxed slightly when she saw he was still there. "Morning," Daniel said softly. She didn't answer. She only sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around her. Her lips moved, whispering her usual line. "I can cook. I can clean. I can be quiet." Daniel shook his head with a small sigh. "You don't have to keep saying that." Her eyes widened, confused. "Then, what should I say?" He hesitated. No one had ever asked him that before. "Say, whatever you want." Her lips trembled. For a moment, she looked as though she might try, but then she lowered her gaze again. "Quiet is safe." Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Maybe, but sometimes silence kills faster than noise." She tilted her head, not understanding. He didn't explain further. The day passed slowly. Daniel tried to work outside, chopping wood, checking his traps, making sure the area around his cabin was clear. But every time he looked at the tree line, he felt eyes on him. The hunters were still out there, waiting. Inside, the girl continued her quiet routine. She cleaned the dishes, swept the floor, and even patched one of the torn curtains using scraps she had found. The house was starting to look different, almost like a home again. When Daniel came back inside, sweat on his brow from chopping wood, he found a plate of food waiting for him on the table. The girl stood nearby, her hands clasped tightly, waiting to see if he would approve. He sat down and tasted it. It was simple stew, but seasoned better than he ever managed. He gave a nod. "It's good." Her shoulders loosened a little. For once, she didn't whisper her line. She just stood there, quiet, but calmer. As the evening drew near, Daniel noticed her watching him more closely. Not with fear this time, but with curiosity. He caught her eyes lingering on the scars on his arms, the way his hands were rough from years of work and war. Finally, she whispered, "You fought." Daniel looked up, surprised. It was the second time she had spoken those words. Yes, long ago. Why? She asked softly. He hesitated, staring at the fire. Memories clawed at him. The battlefield, the smoke, the friends he lost. Because I thought it was the right thing, but fighting takes more than it gives. Her eyes lowered. Every time King takes. Daniel looked at her closely. What did they take from you? She didn't answer. Instead, her hands tightened around the blanket. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back. He didn't press further. He knew the pain was still too raw. The fire crackled between them, the silence heavy but not empty. For the first time, Daniel realized he wasn't just protecting her. She was reminding him of something he had forgotten, why he had once fought in the first place. Later that night, as the wind howled outside, the girl sat closer to the fire. Daniel dozed lightly in his chair, the rifle near his hand. He stirred when he felt movement. She had risen, walking slowly toward him. Her bare feet patted softly on the wooden floor. She stopped just beside his chair, her eyes lowered. Why do you care? She whispered. Daniel blinked, trying to wake fully. Because you knocked on my door. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, as if searching for something in his face. And for the first time, she whispered her truth. No one ever opened before. The words hit Daniel like a blade. His chest tightened. He wanted to say something, but the lump in his throat stopped him. Instead, he reached out slowly and placed his rough hand over hers. She flinched at first, unused to gentle touch, but then, to his surprise, she didn't pull away. For the first time since she arrived, her silence felt different. Not forced, not afraid. It was the silence of someone who was beginning to trust. Daniel looked into the fire, his voice low. As long as I'm here, you'll never be alone again. She didn't answer, but she leaned just slightly closer, her trembling hand resting against his. Outside in the forest, the hunters moved again. Their dogs sniffed the air, their boots crushed the leaves. They were drawing closer, but inside the cabin, something fragile had begun to grow, a bond neither of them had expected. The forest was restless that day. The wind carried more than leaves, it carried voices. Daniel heard them before he saw them, men moving, dogs barking, torches glowing faintly through the trees. The hunters had returned. Inside the cabin, the girl sat near the fire, her face pale, her body trembling. She had sensed it before Daniel even spoke. Her whispers came like a broken prayer. They are here. They are here. They are here. Daniel loaded his rifle with steady hands. His heart was heavy, but his voice was calm. Stay low. Stay quiet. She grabbed his sleeve suddenly, her eyes wide with terror. No, please. If they find me, I will go. Don't fight. Don't die. Daniel looked at her, his jaw set. I'm not letting them take you. Not now. Not ever. Her tears streamed down her cheeks. She shook her head, whispering, no one can stop them. Daniel leaned closer, his voice low and firm. Watch me. Before she could answer, fists slammed against the door. The wood rattled on its hinges. A harsh voice shouted, open up. We know she's in there. The girl whimpered and hid behind the table, covering her mouth with her hands. Daniel stood tall, rifle in hand, staring at the door. Another bang, another shout. She belongs to us. Give her up and we'll leave you alive. Daniel's voice thundered back, louder than he had spoken in years. She doesn't belong to you. She belongs to no one. The hunters cursed outside. The door shook as they rammed it. Daniel raised the rifle and aimed at the window. The moment one of them appeared in the torchlight, he fired. The crack of the gun echoed through the night, and a man fell. Chaos erupted outside. Shouts, the barking of dogs, the pounding of boots. The girl covered her ears, her eyes wide with terror. Daniel's face was carved from stone as he reloaded. He had fought before. He knew fear, but he also knew something greater, the will to protect. The door burst open. A hunter charged inside, chain in hand. Daniel swung the butt of the rifle hard, knocking the man to the ground. The girl screamed, but Daniel's voice cut through. Stay down! Another man rushed in. Daniel fired again. The hunter collapsed. Smoke filled the cabin, the smell of gunpowder heavy in the air. Daniel's chest heaved, his muscles tense. He knew he couldn't hold them off forever. There were too many, but he wasn't fighting for forever. He was fighting for her. Outside, more torches drew closer. The hunters were circling. Daniel kicked the broken door shut and turned to the girl. She crouched against the wall, sobbing, her hands shaking. He knelt in front of her, gripping her shoulders. His voice was steady even as danger closed in. "Listen to me. If I fall, you run. You hear me? Run and never look back." She shook her head violently, her tears spilling. "No, I can't. Not without you." Daniel felt something inside him break. He had lived years in silence, years in loneliness, and now this girl, fragile but strong in ways she didn't know, was clinging to him as if he was her last hope. And maybe he was. He cupped her face gently, his rough hands trembling for the first time. "Then I won't fall. I promise." The hunters struck again. The door splintered. Daniel stood, rifle raised. He fired once, twice, each shot pushing them back. But the bullets were running low. He grabbed his knife, ready for the fight that was coming. The girl, still trembling, crawled closer to him. Her voice was broken but clear. "Why do you fight for me?" Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "Because you knocked on my door." Tears spilled from her eyes. For the first time, she whispered something different. Not her practiced line, not her shield, but her truth. "I can cook, I can clean, I can be quiet, but with you, I don't have to." The words struck Daniel harder than any blow. In that moment, he knew his life had already changed. He was no longer a man living in silence. He was a man with something worth protecting. The hunters broke through again, shouting, chains rattling. Daniel stepped forward, his body shielding hers. The fight raged on, shouts, struggle, steel against steel. By dawn, the forest was silent again. The hunters were gone, some driven back, others lying still in the dirt. Daniel stood at the doorway, battered but alive, his rifle empty, his body bruised, his breath heavy. Behind him, the girl stepped out, the blankets still wrapped around her. She looked at him with wide, tear-streaked eyes. "You stayed," she whispered. Daniel looked at her, exhaustion in his face but warmth in his eyes. "I told you, you're safe here." She moved closer, her small hand reaching for his. And for the first time since she arrived, her silence was not born of fear. It was peace. Daniel squeezed her hand, looking out at the forest where shadows still lingered. His life of silence was gone. His life of loneliness was gone. Because the night he opened his door, everything had changed. Forever.